There is a particular kind of shame that doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't announce itself with a dramatic moment or a single terrible decision. It settles in slowly, the way cold settles into a house when the heat has been off for too long, quietly, completely, until one day you realize you cannot remember what warmth felt like. That is the kind of shame I carry now, not the sharp, immediate kind, the kind that has had time to become part of you. My name is Vanessa. I am 38 years old, and the story I am about to tell you is the most honest thing I have ever said out loud about my husband, about my family, and about the version of myself I am not proud of but refuse to pretend didn't exist. His name is Cole. We met when I was 24 and he was 26, at a mutual friend's birthday gathering in the backyard of a house in Austin, Texas. He was standing near the edge of the gathering, slightly apart from the main crowd, holding a paper cup of lemonade and watching a dog chase a tennis ball across the yard with what I can only describe as complete and undivided delight. Not performing delight, actually feeling it. I remember thinking that was strange and then almost immediately thinking it was the most genuine thing I had seen in a long time. We talked for 3 hours that night. He was not the loudest person there. He was not the funniest or the most impressively credentialed. He was a middle school science teacher in a district that didn't pay its teachers nearly enough. And he spoke about his students the way people usually only speak about things they would willingly sacrifice for, with that specific combination of exhaustion and devotion that tells you a person has found the thing they were made to do. I was finishing my MBA. My family had expectations the size of buildings. I fell in love with Cole anyway, and we married 2 years later. And for a while, for a good long while, I knew exactly what I had chosen and why. Then my family's voice got louder than my own. My mother is a woman who measures love in achievement, not maliciously. She genuinely believes that building an impressive life is the most loving thing you can do for the people who depend on you. My father built a regional construction company from nothing and sold it for more money than I knew how to conceptualize at 22. My brother was a cardiologist. My sister had made partner at her firm at 31. These were the coordinates of my family's world, and Cole, good, patient, extraordinary Cole, who poured himself into 32 12-year-olds every single day, did not map onto those coordinates in any way they recognized. They were never cruel to him. I want to be precise about that. They were pleasant and inclusive, and they asked him polite questions at holiday dinners and listened to his answers with carefully maintained interest. But there was a register underneath the pleasantness, a frequency only I could fully hear, that communicated consistently and without words, that they considered him a strange and slightly unfortunate choice, that they had expected more for me, that they were being gracious about their disappointment. And instead of pushing back against that frequency, I slowly began to absorb it. It happened the way all gradual betrayals happen, in increments too small to feel significant in the moment. I stopped mentioning Cole's name when I talked about my life at family dinners. I started framing his work as something temporary rather than something chosen. When my mother asked carefully and only once whether Cole had ever considered moving into educational administration, something with more growth potential, she said, I told her I had wondered the same thing. I hadn't, but saying it felt easier than defending him, easier than explaining to her why a man who made 32 children fall in love with science every year was not a man who needed to become something else. I chose easy over honest for years, and Cole, who noticed everything, said nothing. He said nothing because that was who he was, not passive, present, not defeated, deliberate. He came home every evening, made dinner most nights because he genuinely loved cooking, asked me real questions about my day and actually listened to the answers, coached a weekend robotics club for kids who couldn't afford the after-school programs, and loved me with a consistency and a quietness that I had somewhere along the way confused for simplicity. The night everything broke open was Thanksgiving. 4 years into our marriage, my parents' house, my entire family present, my parents, my brother and his wife, my sister and her husband. various aunts and cousins and family friends who had known me since childhood. 14 people around a long table, the kind of gathering where everyone is performing slightly elevated versions of themselves. My brother had just closed a significant deal with a hospital network. My sister had been featured in a regional business publication. The conversation was moving in its familiar current, achievements catalogued, milestones acknowledged, the comfortable ritual of a family that speaks fluency in success. Cole was sitting beside me, talking quietly with my cousin about a volcanic eruption unit he had designed for his students that had apparently made one of his kids decide she wanted to be a geologist. My father asked, with genuine warmth and no malice. I want to be clear about that. He was not trying to wound anyone. He asked the table what everyone was looking forward to in the coming year. My brother mentioned a conference. My sister mentioned a case. Someone else mentioned a vacation. And then my father looked at Cole with that careful pleasantness and asked the same question. Cole smiled. He said he was looking forward to a solar eclipse that was coming in the spring because he was planning a field trip and had been writing a grant proposal to get the proper viewing equipment for his students, particularly for 3 kids in his class whose parents couldn't afford the trip, and he was hoping it came through. There was a beat of silence, the kind that isn't hostile but isn't warm either, the kind that simply reflects the gap between what was said and what the room knew how to value. And then I heard myself speak. I said, "And I will not dress this up or soften it because it does not deserve softening," I said, with a small laugh designed to smooth over the silence. Cole is very devoted to the ordinary things. 14 people heard me say it. Cole was one of them. The conversation moved on immediately, the way conversations do when something uncomfortable has been papered over with social momentum. Nobody reacted dramatically. My mother changed the subject. My father nodded and asked my brother something. The table continued. Cole put his fork down very gently. He did not look at me. He picked it back up after a moment and finished his dinner and spoke pleasantly to the people around him for the rest of the evening and drove us home afterward in a silence that felt different from other silences, heavier and more final, as though something had been resolved inside him without my participation. Please stay with me. I know this is hard to hear. It was hard to live. But the part that changed everything is coming, and I promise you it is worth staying for. Watch until the very last word of this story, and if something in this is reaching you, please like this video and subscribe to this channel, because these stories are told for people who need them. He didn't bring it up that night or the next morning. It was 3 days later, on a Sunday, when he sat down across from me at the kitchen table with his coffee and said, quietly and without preamble, that he needed to tell me something and he needed me to actually hear it. He told me that he knew. He had always known. He said he had watched me shrink, him in small ways for years, not because he thought I was a cruel person, but because he thought I had forgotten who I had married and why. He said he had stayed quiet because he believed in us, and because he had enough confidence in his own worth that other people's measurements of it didn't undo him. But he said what I had said at Thanksgiving was different, because it had not come from my family. It had come from me, and he needed to know whether the woman who had stood beside him at 26 and chosen him, knowing exactly what he was and was not, who was still in the room. I started crying before he finished. Not the graceful kind. The kind that comes from somewhere you didn't know was that full. I told him everything. All of it. The years of absorbing my family's frequency. The incremental betrayals. The moments I had chosen easy over honest and called it keeping the peace. I told him I had confused his quietness for simplicity, and his steadiness for smallness, and his devotion for limitation, and that every single one of those confusions was mine and not his. And that I was sorry in a way that felt completely inadequate to the size of what I was sorry for. He listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something I have thought about almost every day since. He said, "Vanessa, I have never needed your family to see me. I only ever needed you to." We stayed. We chose each other again, deliberately this time, with full knowledge of the cost of not paying attention. We went to counseling. I had the hardest conversation of my life with my mother, not to punish her, but because I finally understood that I had been using her voice as a permission slip for my own cowardice, and that was not fair to her or to Cole or to me. She listened. She did not fully understand at first, but she tried, which was more than I had given Cole credit for being worth. Now I need to tell you what happened with the grant. Cole had submitted it in October, a modest proposal for solar, eclipse viewing equipment and 3 fully funded field trip spots for students whose families couldn't cover the cost. He had spent 4 evenings writing it at the kitchen table, while I watched television in the next room, without asking what he was working on. He had not told me about it because I think he had learned not to offer me things I hadn't shown interest in valuing. The grant came through in February, but that is not the whole story. One of the parents of a student in Cole's class, a man named Arthur, whose daughter Priya had been in Cole's class for 2 years, had heard about the proposal through the school's parent network. Arthur ran a mid-sized engineering firm. He had watched his daughter transform over 2 years from a child who believed school was something that happened to her into a child who stayed up past her bedtime, reading about tectonic plates and asking questions at dinner that neither he nor his wife could answer. He had asked Priya once what changed for her. She had said without hesitation, "Mr. Cole makes you feel like the world is full of things worth understanding." Arthur contacted the school district in January. He did not just cover the 3 unfunded spots. He funded the entire field trip for all 32 students. He then established, and this is the part that still makes me have to stop and breathe when I think about it, a small annual science enrichment fund in Cole's name, specifically for field experiences and materials for students whose families faced financial barriers. He said in his letter to the district that his daughter's love of learning was the most valuable thing he had watched happen in her education, and that it had a specific origin, and that origin deserved to be honored. Cole found out on a Wednesday afternoon. He called me from the school parking lot, and his voice was doing something I had never heard it do before. Not falling apart, exactly, but close to it, in the way people come close to falling apart, when something they have quietly and consistently believed in is finally, publicly confirmed. I drove to that parking lot. I sat with him in the car for an hour. I held his hand and I told him, finally, completely, without any audience and without any performance, that I had always known, that I had known since a backyard in Austin when he watched a dog chase a tennis ball with his whole heart, that I had simply lost the thread of it for a while, and that losing it had been the most expensive mistake of my life, and that I intended to spend a long time making sure he knew I had found it again. My family came to the Eclipse field trip. My mother's idea, actually. She stood on a school athletic field in April with cardboard viewing glasses on, surrounded by 32 12-year-olds losing their minds with wonder, and she watched my husband move between them, answering questions, pointing at the sky, crouching down to a student's level to explain something, with the same complete and undivided attention. He had given a dog chasing a tennis ball 14 years before, and when I looked at her, she was not performing interest. She was genuinely moved. She found me at the edge of the field, and she took my hand, and she said, quietly, "He's remarkable, isn't he?" It was not a question. I said yes. I said it without hesitation and without qualification and without a small laugh to smooth over any silence. I said it the way I should have been saying it for years. Cole didn't hear it. He was 20 feet away, helping a girl named Priya photograph the corona through a proper lens. Both of them bent over the equipment with matching expressions of absolute focused joy. He didn't need to hear it. He had never needed anyone to tell him what he was worth. That was always the difference between us. And learning to close that distance, learning to be as certain of him as he had always been of himself, has been the most important thing I have done in my adult life. Not my MBA, not my title, not any room I have ever impressed. This, choosing to see him, finally, completely, before it was too late.